A brilliant Nigerian student arrives in the US to pursue her medical dream, only to face racial bias that challenges her every step. Will she rise above it? Amara arrived at John F. Kennedy International Airport on a crisp autumn afternoon, her heart racing with excitement. The flight from Lagos to New York had been long, but she didn't mind. The destination was everything she had dreamed of. At 24, she was finally stepping into a world of opportunity, armed with a scholarship to a prestigious medical school in the United States. This was the chance her parents had worked tirelessly for, the culmination of years of sacrifice. She could almost feel their pride in her success, and it fueled her determination to prove she was worthy of the trust they had placed in her. Her parents had always told her that education was the key to unlocking any door, that it was the one thing no one could ever take away from her. Amara had embraced that mantra wholeheartedly. Her father, a respected doctor in Lagos, had worked for years to save enough money to send her abroad, while her mother, a dedicated teacher, had sacrificed countless hours of her own time to support Amara's academic journey. It was a sacrifice she could never forget, and it only deepened her resolve to succeed. As Amara stepped through the terminal and into the hustle of New York, she was filled with awe at the sheer size and energy of the city. The skyscrapers loomed above her like giants, the streets bustling with people from all over the world. She marveled at the diversity, the melting pot that she had always heard about growing up. For a brief moment, it all seemed perfect. But as she navigated the unfamiliar streets to her new dorm, she felt a subtle unease. The excitement of being in this new world began to be tempered by the realization that she wasn't just another student here. She was different, an immigrant, a black woman in a sea of privileged, confident classmates. The first day of medical school felt like a blur. The campus was enormous, far more intimidating than the small universities she had attended in Nigeria. She could barely keep up with the pace as she shuffled between massive lecture halls, each one filled with students who seemed like they already knew their place. Most of her classmates were white, and many of them came from families with wealth and resources Amara could only dream of. They were the children of doctors, lawyers, and professors, while she, an immigrant from Nigeria, was here on merit, on hard work, on a scholarship. When she sat down in her first anatomy class, Amara immediately felt the pressure. The lecture hall was filled with eager faces, many already familiar with one another. Amara was alone in the back row, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. She scanned the room and realized that she was the only black student. Her accent, though slight, made her feel more self-conscious as she tried to keep up with the rapid-fire explanations of the professor. Dr. Mitchell, the lecturer, was an older man with a sharp tone, and while he didn't say much to her directly, his occasional glance and the subtle condescension in his tone left her feeling as though she didn't belong. Though she excelled in her studies, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that her race was a barrier she couldn't overcome. Her classmates were polite, but it was clear they didn't see her as an equal. When they discussed topics in small groups, she was often left out. Even when she volunteered to answer a question, the hesitation before they acknowledged her was enough to make her question herself. Her answers, though correct, felt like they were dismissed more easily than the contributions of her white peers. In group projects, she worked harder than anyone else, but it was the others who took the lead, whose ideas were praised. Amara's contributions were either ignored or overshadowed. The first hint of blatant discrimination came when Amara was paired with two classmates for a clinical practice session. The patient, a middle-aged white man, seemed reluctant to engage with her at first. When it was her turn to take his medical history, he gave her one-word answers, his eyes frequently darting to the other students. He asked if there was anyone else who could help him, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. After the session, Amara overheard one of her classmates whispering about how she was too green and not ready for patient care. The words stung. She had worked so hard to get here, but it felt like nothing she did could erase the stigma that came with being a black immigrant. As the weeks passed, Amara began to notice more subtle forms of exclusion. She was passed over for research opportunities. Her ideas in class discussions were often dismissed, and she found herself excluded from social gatherings. When she raised her concerns with her academic advisor, she was told to stay patient and that everyone had to earn their place. But the more she worked, the more she realized that her place was being determined by factors beyond her control. Her race, her accent, her background, those things seemed to matter more than her merit. Late one evening, after another long day of classes and clinical rounds, Amara sat alone in her dorm room. The loneliness weighed heavily on her. She missed her family, the familiarity of home, the support of her community. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, telling her that nothing worth having came easily. But the more she tried to prove herself, the more the system seemed to work against her. Amara had always prided herself on being strong, on overcoming challenges. She had come here to succeed, to make her family proud, and to follow in her father's footsteps. But the weight of the discrimination she was facing was beginning to crush her. She wondered if she was just a token, a face to show diversity, or if her true potential would ever be recognized. But Amara refused to give up. She had come too far and worked too hard to let this defeat her. She knew she would have to push harder, be stronger than ever. She wasn't just here to become a doctor. She was here to prove that people like her, immigrants, people of color, deserved a place at the table. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Amara was determined to fight for her future. Her journey had just begun. Amara arrived at John F. Kennedy International Airport on a crisp autumn afternoon, her heart racing with excitement. The flight from Lagos to New York had been long, but nothing could dampen the thrill of arriving in the land of opportunity. At 24, she was a talented Nigerian woman about to start medical school in one of the most prestigious institutions in the United States. It was everything she had worked for, everything her parents had sacrificed for. She had excelled academically and earned a scholarship. This was her moment to prove she belonged. Her parents had always told her that education was the key to unlocking a better life. Her father, a respected doctor in Lagos, had worked tirelessly to save for her education, while her mother, a schoolteacher, had devoted herself to helping Amara succeed. The sacrifices they had made weighed heavily on Amara's shoulders. She was determined to make them proud and to live up to their hopes. But as soon as she stepped onto the campus of the medical school, Amara felt the weight of her difference. The students around her were overwhelmingly white, dressed in expensive coats and shoes, all confident in a way she couldn't yet relate to. Amara, on the other hand, felt like an outsider. She was the only black student in the room, and it didn't take long for her to realize that her race would always be a factor, no matter how hard she worked. The first lecture hall was massive, and the energy in the room was electrifying, but Amara couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Her classmates appeared confident, exchanging jokes and stories, familiar with each other, while Amara quietly observed from the back. The professors, sharp and quick with their questions, seemed to engage easily with the students around her, but Amara struggled to find her footing. Though she had come prepared, there was an undercurrent she couldn't ignore, a sense that, no matter how well she performed, she wasn't truly seen as one of them. Her first clinical skills session highlighted the tension she felt in the classroom. Amara was paired with two classmates, a young white man named Eric and a woman named Sarah, to take a patient history. The patient, a middle-aged woman, hesitated when Amara approached. "Isn't there someone else who can help me?" she asked nervously. eyeing Amara's two classmates. Amara tried to stay professional, but the sting of the woman's hesitation lingered long after the session ended. She found herself questioning whether her race had affected the patient's comfort, but as always, she pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to let herself be distracted by such things. Yet, the feeling of being judged for something beyond her control was difficult to ignore. It wasn't just the patients, it was her peers too. Though they never outright rejected her, their indifference was unmistakable. Study sessions, group discussions. She was often left on the periphery, her contributions barely acknowledged. One afternoon, while waiting in the student lounge, Amara overheard two classmates, Sarah and Alex, discussing their latest patient rounds. Sarah mentioned a case they had handled, casually commenting on how easy it was. But when Alex brought up Amara's name in relation to another case, Sarah's tone shifted. "I don't know," she said. "She's just so new. Maybe she's still adjusting." The words stung, though they were casual. It wasn't the first time Amara had felt dismissed, but hearing it from Sarah, who had never really engaged with her beyond superficial pleasantries, made the moment even harder to bear. It wasn't a matter of competence. Amara knew she was just as capable as anyone. But it was clear that, in this world, she was still seen as the outsider. Her qualifications didn't matter as much as her race. Despite her growing frustration, Amara threw herself into her studies. She spent hours in the library, working harder than she ever had before. She couldn't afford to make mistakes, not in a place where her every move seemed scrutinized. She thought that if she just proved herself enough, maybe things would change. But no matter how many hours she put in, how many nights she spent studying, it felt like the system was still set up to keep her from advancing. In one of her clinical rounds, Amara was asked to lead a patient discussion. Though she had prepared thoroughly, the moment she stood in front of the group, she could feel the resistance in the room. The other students barely looked at her, only offering quick nods and vague comments. The patient seemed more engaged with the white students than with Amara, and once again, she was left feeling invisible. It was during moments like this that Amara realized the true weight of the battle ahead of her. Her hard work was often ignored, overshadowed by her race. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment where talent and ability should have been enough. But it wasn't. The silent bias was everywhere, embedded in the way people interacted with her, the way they dismissed her without even realizing it. And no matter how well she performed, she would never be seen the same way as her peers. But Amara wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't afford to. Her parents had worked too hard, and she had come too far. As the semester continued, Amara learned that she would have to do more than just be good at her studies. She would have to fight, not just for grades, but for recognition, for respect. She was here to prove she belonged, not just because of her talent, but because she had earned her place in this world. The system might have been against her, but she was determined to break through it. As the weeks went by, Amara's resolve began to harden. The challenges she faced seemed endless, but so was her determination. She couldn't let herself fall behind. She would rise above the subtle slights and microaggressions, work harder, prove them wrong. She buried herself in her textbooks, in patient histories, in clinical rotations, determined to earn the respect she deserved. But the isolation only deepened. No matter how much she studied, no matter how much she excelled, it was never enough. The other students seemed to glide effortlessly through the program, their contributions easily acknowledged, their ideas taken seriously. Meanwhile, Amara's work was always met with polite indifference. She was good, even great, but it felt like her greatness was dismissed simply because of who she was. One afternoon during a clinical skills practice, Amara was assigned to take a patient's history. Her partner for the session was Alex, a tall, confident white student who had been friendly toward her from the start. Unlike most of the other students, he had taken the time to talk to her, to actually include her in discussions. At first, Amara had been wary. She had learned not to expect much from white classmates, especially when their friendliness seemed superficial. But Alex had proven to be different. He wasn't perfect. He didn't understand every struggle she faced, but he tried, and that small effort was enough to make Amara feel seen. In that session, Alex offered to let her take the lead. They were paired with an older patient who, thankfully, didn't seem uncomfortable with Amara's presence. The interaction went smoothly, with Amara asking the right questions, making the patient feel comfortable. When the session ended, Amara felt a rare spark of pride in herself. For a brief moment, she wasn't just a black student. She was a competent medical professional doing her job well. Afterward, Alex approached her, a slight grin on his face. "You did great in there," he said. "You're going to make a fantastic doctor." One afternoon, Amara received a notification she had been waiting for. The medical school was offering students the chance to present their research at an upcoming prestigious conference. The opportunity was a huge step for any student. It was a chance to showcase their work and earn recognition among top professionals in the field. Amara had worked for weeks on her research project, a study on diagnostic procedures for rare conditions in immigrant populations. She had poured her heart into it, meticulously gathering data, analyzing case studies, and preparing her presentation. She knew this was her chance to prove that she was just as capable as the other students, that her talent and dedication spoke for themselves. She had been told she would be considered for a spot, but the final decision would be made by the faculty committee. Amara could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. If she was chosen, it would be the first time she was publicly recognized for her work, her intelligence, and her perseverance. Days passed, and Amara found herself checking her inbox every few hours. When the email finally came, it was with the subject line, "Conference Research Presentation." Her hands shook as she opened it, heart pounding. But as she read the contents of the email, the excitement quickly drained away. The slot she had hoped for was given to another student, David, a well-liked, easygoing white student who had, by his own admission, barely spent any time on his project. He was charming, popular, and well-connected with the faculty, and despite Amara's stellar work, it was him who had been chosen. The email was polite, stating that her project was not quite ready for presentation, offering vague language that made no sense given the quality of her research. She sat frozen for a moment, trying to process the crushing reality. Once again, it wasn't her hard work that mattered. It was the invisible systems that kept working against her, the bias that could not be shaken off, no matter how much she deserved it. Amara's frustration erupted. She had always tried to remain calm, to push through the bias with grace, to let her work speak for itself. But this was the breaking point. She stood up from her desk, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She could feel the anger rising in her chest, a wave of heat that threatened to spill over. The injustice felt unbearable. She had given everything to be here, to earn her place, but in this moment, it seemed that nothing she did could change the way she was seen. Tears of frustration welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. She wasn't about to cry over this. She was stronger than that. But the hurt lingered. The feeling of being invisible, of having her achievements disregarded simply because of her race, it cut deeper than she had anticipated. Later that evening, Amara sat down to call her mother. Her voice cracked as soon as her mother picked up. She didn't want to burden her with these emotions, but the weight of the day was too much. "Mama," she said quietly, "I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I worked so hard on this project. I did everything right." Her mother's voice was soothing on the other end of the line. "Amara, you are doing nothing wrong. You are doing everything right. They will see it eventually. But Amara wasn't sure. How much longer would she have to wait? How many more hurdles would she have to overcome? She wanted to believe her mother's words, but a part of her feared that, eventually, might never come. After the call ended, Amara found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She looked tired, her face drawn, her eyes tired from sleepless nights of studying and working harder than anyone else. She had come to the US with big dreams, with the hope that if she worked hard enough, everything would fall into place. But this, the exclusion, the subtle bias, the constant reminder that she didn't truly belong, was taking its toll. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The fight wasn't over. She couldn't let it be over. She was here for a reason, and that reason wasn't to be silenced or diminished by those who refused to see her worth. But as much as she tried to tell herself that she could keep pushing forward, Amara knew that she couldn't do it alone. She was tired of fighting an invisible battle every day. The next morning, Amara made her decision. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. She needed to confront the system, to make her voice heard. She reached out to Alex, her only ally in this fight. She shared her frustration, the sense of betrayal she felt, and the overwhelming weight of systemic bias that seemed to follow her at every turn. "Alex," she said, "I can't do this alone anymore. I need to speak out." Alex, always supportive but now serious, responded, "Amara, you've been carrying this weight for far too long. It's time to let people know what's really going on. The school has to hear you." Amara knew Alex was right. She couldn't just continue to suffer in silence. She had earned her place here, and it was time for the school to recognize that. It was time for her to speak out, not just for herself, but for all the students who had been overlooked, marginalized, and dismissed. She didn't know exactly what would happen when she spoke up, but she knew she had to try. The system wouldn't change unless someone challenged it, and Amara was determined to be that person. The next day, Amara couldn't shake the feeling of having reached a turning point. The anger from the previous night still lingered, but so did a sense of clarity. She had been silent for too long, quietly absorbing the injustice and hoping things would change on their own. But she now realized that nothing would change unless she took action. She began drafting an email to the school's diversity and inclusion office. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, but she pushed through. She needed to be heard. Her words weren't accusatory, but they were direct. She described the subtle but pervasive discrimination she had faced, the constant exclusion from discussions, the lack of recognition for her hard work, and the blatant disrespect shown during her clinical rotations. She spoke about the impact it had on her mental and emotional well-being, and how it was affecting her ability to succeed in a system that didn't seem to value her the way it did her peers. After several drafts, she hit send. Her heart raced as she sat back, waiting for the inevitable response. Would they listen? Would they even care? The reply came quickly, but it wasn't what she expected. The email thanked her for bringing these issues to light and assured her that her concerns would be investigated. It was vague, polite, and impersonal, but it was a start. Amara knew the road ahead would be difficult, but the fact that she had spoken up meant everything. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't invisible. Later that week, Amara met with the office to discuss her concerns in person. The administrators were empathetic, offering apologies for her experiences. However, their words were carefully measured, and it was clear that they didn't fully grasp the depth of the problem. Still, Amara didn't back down. She continued to share her experiences, demanding change, not just for herself, but for others who might come after her. The meeting didn't result in immediate solutions, but Amara's courage to speak up had ignited a conversation. It wasn't much yet, but it was a beginning. She wasn't sure where it would go, but she felt empowered for the first time since arriving. In the months that followed, the changes came slowly but steadily. Amara's decision to speak out sparked conversations throughout the school, and though it wasn't an immediate shift, it created enough of a ripple for administrators to start addressing the issues she had raised. The Diversity Office began hosting more inclusive workshops, and new policies were implemented to ensure that all students, regardless of background, had equal opportunities. Amara didn't get everything she wanted, but the conversations she started were vital. She began to see the seeds of change take root. Her peers who had once ignored her began to approach her with a new respect. Some even apologized for their past indifference, acknowledging their ignorance. Others started to engage with her more, not because they had to, but because they finally saw her for who she was, a capable, determined student. Though the progress was slow, Amara felt a sense of pride she hadn't felt before. She had stood up against the system, not just for herself, but for the other students of color who had been quietly suffering in the same way. Her fight wasn't just about earning her place, it was about making sure others like her could find theirs too. By the time she graduated, Amara had become a respected voice within the school. Her work had earned her accolades, but more importantly, she had become a symbol of resilience. She was no longer just the immigrant student in a foreign world. She was a leader, someone who had challenged the status quo and helped reshape the narrative for future generations. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Amara couldn't help but smile. The fight had been long, and it had cost her more than she ever expected. But in the end, she had won, not just for herself, but for all those who would follow. And as she looked out at the audience, she knew this was only the beginning.